Look, the fundamentals really of good suburbs in Newcastle is a couple of things. So again, this is unlike any other area. The first two key things is consistently low supply and high demand from a wealthy income demographic. Look, it's really important here in Newcastle simply because low supply isn't the case in all areas. If you go out, to some of the newer areas in Newcastle, there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of subdivisions going on. There's a lot of actual future subdivisions as well. And also, secondly, with that too, is the demand is misleading from what you read on the news or other statistics agencies, because some of these areas only really have demand from investors and first home buyers. So they're not the sort of people who push home prices up. So that's something you definitely need to consider. Look, access to high paying jobs is another one. That in Newcastle is key because not all areas are well serviced by many, I'd say, good jobs. Don't get me wrong, there are a fair few areas with good jobs, but it's not all areas as well. Lifestyle triangle, the distance it takes to go from school to work to places, lifestyle locations and back home. If that's short, it's pretty good. Now, that lifestyle triangle is probably not like Sydney as it is in Newcastle, because in Sydney, that if it's within probably like 20 minutes to half an hour, people are still pretty happy. In Newcastle, it's like 10 to 15 minutes. You don't want it to be much further than that. It's just a microcosm of Sydney, that's all. Transport slash facilities, and then I've put hospitals slash university. So transport, I'll go to transport first because it's important, because there's certain locations in Newey that are very well serviced pretty much to the whole town. I will get into that in future suburbs when I actually talk about them. Facilities, and then I'll put hospitals slash university. Look, the two biggest employers in Newcastle are the hospital and university precinct. John Hunter Calvary made it, obviously, University of Newcastle, UON. Really big employers there, and they're quite well known. Good medical precinct in University of Newcastle as well. World-renowned healthcare facilities at those hospitals as well. So they actually do help quite a bit. I'm not saying it needs to be next to the hospital. I'm saying it needs to be in the vicinity. If it's within the vicinity, it's quite good as well. School zones, look, it's not as important, I'd say, as somewhere like Sydney or Melbourne or even some parts of inner Brisbane, but it still does play a part. Like a lot of you have quite a few younger families moving in to these areas that want to take, especially to the local primary schools, the better primary schools there, and also just even access to the decent local high schools or the grammar school. They're all pretty important. Makes a lot of sense to buy in those sorts of locations. Another one, despite being a regional town, I'd call it a little bit similar to Sydney and Melbourne, Newcastle. Walkability does play a part, that especially in certain parts of the inner city areas, especially Ward 1 of Newcastle, walkability plays a part. People move here to should I say, be close by to a lot of things. So there's some suburbs here that people don't even have cars. Somewhere it's only one car, generally a family. That's pretty common. So that's also a part in Newcastle. Not many people probably know that, but it is definitely a part of good suburbs in Newcastle. Look, let's get into what's really driving this cycle, and it's not the same thing as always. So the issue is that in the COVID boom, basically everyone just thought, we saw some statistic here, some statistic there, and that drew the market up. And yeah, sure, it might have in that time, but longer term, that's not going to happen. And a lot of those poorer performing suburbs are going to start to wear off. So that's what I'm getting into here. What's really driving the cycle? First thing I'm just going to get into is demographics, jobs, proximity. So what do I mean by this? I mean, basically where the generally wealthier people are going is generally where everyone else is following as well. The right people all go into the same location. So, I mean, what do I mean by this? Like your inner city, you mainly Ward 1, Ward 2 locations, you've got your beachy kind of lifestyle-y people, then you've got your inner city kind of people as well. There's still beachy people there too, don't get me wrong, but they're all going to the same locations. That's what I'll say. And they generally are also in good proximity to the jobs and proximity to the CBD. So that's what I mean by jobs and proximity. They all kind of go together. So that's kind of what's happening there. tight supply levels. So all you'd have to do really here is follow the first point and then look at the second point as into the supply levels of certain suburbs. There are suburbs here where are good to buy in that basically have quartered supply levels. So I mean, you might have had let's say 12 properties on the market before COVID, and now you've only got about 3 at any point in time. So that's happening quite a lot in the better suburbs. It's just because people like living there. And that's due to things like your lifestyle, so being close to the city or the beach. People generally like these areas and they don't want to move because there's such finite stock here that they never sell. That's the thing, because they know they have to replace, and it's going to be very hard to replace whatever they've got. So that's another big driving factor, the lifestyle, the distance to the city and the beach as well. Last 2 points I want to get into is the correct dwelling for location. So a good example of this is if you're buying in a family suburb, you don't want to be buying a unit or even in a family location of the suburb, you don't buy a unit because no one is going to want to live in it. So what I'm finding is as well, it's a fight to quality for the correct dwelling in the correct locations as well. So you might have a suburb even with an average of 20 people coming through an open home, for example. Now, that might just be an average dwelling, but if it is really very much so the right dwelling, I'm telling you right now, you'll probably get something like 35 to 40. It would be close to double the amount of people going through that open home. So that's just something to consider. It is really playing a large part in this part of the cycle. Look, the final part I want to get into is gentrification. Now, Newcastle, don't get me wrong, it is an old city. It does have a long mining history. It has a long history with BHP and obviously coal. But there's a lot of parts of Newey that are genuinely gentrifying, that already have it, and some that already have it and continuing going. But some of these suburbs actually have very high median incomes, quite low LVRs, and also a very young age. So that's idealistically what you want, because what it will mean is a lot of them will continue to earn more money because they've still got a lot of years left in their life. So those areas will just continue to go up because they'll start having families, and what you'll see, you get young families, you young professionals anyway, but what you'll see is these areas will continue that trend because they're young and they're going to live there for a long time, and the supply level is very tight as well. So if you have that kind of makeup, as in obviously gentrifying, good median income and a young median age, that's a really good thing for a suburb long term, because it means it's got a lot of longevity in it, and people probably won't sell for a long time either. It's a good thing. Just be aware of that median age. It needs to have but most of, particularly the first 2 points, my fundamentals of good suburbs in it, to actually pass the test of this gentrification with young professionals with high income. Make sure you have that, because the numbers can sway you. If you go out to, should I say, a more first home buyer location, it will probably still have reasonable, should I say, income levels. The supply are probably going to just, knock it off, and also the LVR will knock it off as well. So that's just something to have a look at in this. But all of these key things, and I've only kind of given you 5 points, but these are the key things that are driving this part of the cycle.